Thank you so much for coming, guys. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you making all the way down to the Orange Hall, which is quite remote and quite challenging to find on the afternoon of the second day. I appreciate that. Today, I'll be talking about culture in a gaming studio. I have to warn you that this subject is a bit academic. Like, really, brace yourselves. Shit is gonna get thick. If I sense that you are guys kind of disconnected, not following me, I'll be taking breaks for questions, so don't be shy to ask questions in the middle of the talk, because, like, honestly, I have the full hour, but I'm concerned about all the depth and breadth and complexity of the stuff I'm hoping to talk about. But hopefully, we can get this done. Also, even though I've been running a gaming studio for 10 years and we made a decent amount of money, I won't be giving you the bullet point list of things you have to do to make a successful game or build a profitable business, even though by now I'm pretty sure I have the recipe, but it's boring, so I won't be talking about this. I'll be talking mostly about utilizing soft power in a company to influence the inputs, the team, the mindset, the hiring process, the communication protocols, to influence the outputs, like revenue, profitability of the games you're actually making. So, soft power, manipulation, fascinating subjects. A few words about my career. I've been working in game dev for about 15 years. Yes, that's me in my more natural habitat. I hate this, Klaus. I did some content for games as a teenager. I worked as a software developer in a game porting house. I worked as an indie developer. I started my startup, which became reasonably successful. And for the last 10, 11 years, I've been working as an executive. I mean, a talking head, an executive in the game industry. So I have these different perspectives on the business of games, the different environments I've been in, the different approaches people have taken. And that's kind of brought me to, or sparked my curiosity towards the differentiating factors that make some studios great and others not so much. And also the different phases we have gone through. This is the company I represent. We've done quite well for ourselves. We've been around for 12 years. We'll be celebrating our 12th birthday in exactly 2 weeks. We've been among the first pioneers of mobile free-to-play, Android development, ad monetization, in-app purchases. I think we added them 2 months after they were actually introduced by the platform. We did a crazy amount of downloads. We did one game which was #1 in its category for like 16 months straight. We won a bunch of awards. We pivoted towards VR recently. We have one of the best-selling games on Steam currently, and for the past year and a half as well. So there's a lot of good things to say about us, but the thing is, whenever someone comes on stage and talks about the company, they're basically giving you the highlights, a facade of sorts, like some data points on a chart, like we've done this, we've done this, we've done that. You don't see the complete picture, unless it's a public company with its quarterly reports being scrutinized by experts all the time. You only see the best parts, and what's hiding underneath is the meaty bits, the failures, the roller coaster rides, in my case, managerial mistakes of epic proportions, the crisis, and all the learnings. In our case, just to give you the context, we bootstrapped for the first 8 years. So we didn't raise any funding. We started as a company of 5 guys, 3 founders, 2 early employees, had no experience running the business at all at that point, and bet on Android. Iterated really quickly, and within a year and a half, we launched a game which eventually, having been made on a budget of about 10,000 euro, made about 25 million euro. And that kind of set us on a really steep trajectory, which was pretty awesome at the time. I won't be denying that. That was a lot of fun. But within 2 years, the company was close to bankruptcy. So we went from making, I think, 5.5 million in net profit 2 years, in the second full year, actually. And you can kind of infer that if we apply the typical multiples, the company was worth anywhere between 50 to, let's say, 80 million euro at the time. And that's pretty decent for a kind of self-funded startup, 2 years old, in a growing market. That was around 2012, 2013, the explosion of mobile gaming. Fully owned by the founders. I used to own almost half of the company by then. So that was quite a rapid ascension. Fast forward 2 years, we have burned through all that money. We never really cashed out. There was a change in the market, which cut our revenue in half, and we had 6 months of runway. So that was like a rapid shift of the situation for us, and a rapid change of my attitude, because everyone who's been in this position where they've done something good, they've achieved some measurable success, and then things stop working out, even if you are objectively still doing well, you still have a functional company, yes, it's going through difficult times, but it's still alive, you get those thoughts like, okay, now the truth is coming out. That was luck. I always knew that was luck. We just got lucky. I'm no CEO material. I'm no entrepreneur material. I'm just a nerd who built some stuff, and it worked, and it clicked, and it was luck. But now I have 80 people depending on me, and everyone is going to see that this is my true colors, that I can't run a company. This is not going to be replicated. We're not going to make another hit game. We will never repeat this, and everybody is going to see that I'm a failure eventually. So the classic imposter syndrome. And I had some really dark thoughts throughout that period, and ironically, that was also when the media started kind of catching up on our success, because the media is always delayed. The media is like the latest output. Like you have inputs, you have outputs in the form of products, then you have revenue, then you have something else, and then the media will eventually realize, oh, this is happening. So we were being nominated for all sorts of awards, like Startup of the Year. I was nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year in my country, becoming a kind of micro-celebrity. And at the same time, in my head, this was happening, like, we are fucking dying, I'm a failure, I've let down my entire team, we're gonna have to lay off 80 people, half of them have relocated to Estonia to work for us, now they have to go back to their families and wherever they are. And that was quite a dark period. We managed to navigate it. We managed to eventually right the ship, changed a bunch of things about how we think as managers, how we run the company, how we spend our money, how we invest. So eventually we escaped the situation, but then in the following 8 years, we had several cycles like this, where things were looking bright, something happened, crisis, near-death experience, again and again. And that sparked my curiosity about, again, what's the fundamental element, what's the magic sauce, because we had the same founders. We still had the same guys with the same ideas, working in the same market. We had more people, we had more money, we had more professionals in our team. Why are we suddenly failing? And then we're doing some great things again, and then we start failing again. And so my curiosity kind of shifted from what can I build as a product to building businesses and eventually building cultures. And by the way, curiosity is what's been driving me throughout most of my career. It's, I've been thinking about this, and that's the primary driver throughout. It's not the status, and it's definitely not the money. And this is a bit of a detour, but for anyone running a company or aspiring to start a startup, I think money is a pretty weak primary goal. It's a nice side effect. It's a nice reward, but you have to find joy in the process. And it's the same with, let's say, chasing happiness. If you are chasing happiness, that brings you to drugs, because that's the most efficient shortcut. Honestly. You have to enjoy the process, and then happiness is a side effect of enjoying the process. Same with business, or if you are chasing orgasm, if you are doing the right things, it's going to happen. If you are trying really hard, it gets progressively more difficult. So same with business, same with money. Curiosity, desire to build, desire to test your limits, desire to game the system in many ways, to hack the system, great motivators. Wealth has always been kind of a side effect. Anyway, going back to the subject. If you ask me about my ultimate findings, if you ask me today what makes a studio great, to invest into, to start, to get hired by really early, I would probably name those things. Elite leadership means people have not just done something great in their career, but done something that's highly relevant. If you hire me to build a VR studio these days, I'll probably be a good fit under some conditions because my company has done great in that space with certain caveats. What kind of VR, what genres? If you hire me to run a AAA console developer, I'm not a good fit. I haven't done that, even though I have a pretty decent profile, I have 10 years of experience. I don't think I can hire my own team in that environment. I don't think I can be a really good fit because I haven't done exactly that. So there's great leadership on paper, and there is elite leadership that can kind of hire their own team, build the foundation, spread the right ideas vertically and horizontally, and vice versa. USP PMF, a unique selling point, product market fit, obviously kind of saying trivial things, but we don't know what exactly the USP of our game will be when we're starting the development process. We don't know what's the product market fit gonna look like finally, but we have to have a solid hypothesis at every point. We have to always have this conviction that, okay, maybe we'll have to change this plan many times in a row, but at this time, I believe that this is the best application of my time and energy, and this is the one thing I want to be working on right now. If it's wrong, we move on, we pivot, but there has to be a conviction that this is our PMF, or this is our path towards finding that PMF. And not all companies have this. Sometimes suggest, it's a great game idea, let's build a game. Is this the best game idea you could spend your time on right now, and your team's time in the next 2 years? That's a different question. Many bullets followed by a cannonball. I use this metaphor to describe how in a gaming studio that's kind of claiming to become successful, you have to have two different mentalities. One is the R&D mentality where you can iterate on stuff and kind of produce ideas, test them really rapidly. And the other one is the scaling mechanism where you find something that works and you focus on growing it. And it kind of sounds trivial again, like, yeah, we've been testing different ideas and we found something that's working. Why are we not scaling it? But these are actually different mentalities. It's kind of like dating people and building a family. Dating people is one skill. Building a relationship long-term is a completely different set of skills. And in a studio, it's really fun to develop gameplay mechanics. It's a totally different game when you are pumping out content, when you're scaling your marketing, when you're marketing first, when you are growing the infrastructure. So you have to have this capability to rapidly iterate, find something else, and then double down, triple down on this if it works. More difficult in practice than it sounds in theory. And finally, the epic culture. And that's, of all the abstract concepts you've heard so far, this is the most abstract, this is the most tricky. And this is why I chose it for my topic today, because I like challenge and pain and suffering. Culture. Does that make sense so far? Like, are you guys more or less with me? Because that was like a really, really, really long, multi-layered intro. Does that make sense? Thank you for nodding. Yeah. Awesome. So, there are many ways to talk about culture, art and music, among other things. But in my context, it's the grand total of all the behavior patterns in any group of people. Not necessarily business. Like, if you look at societies, there are really intricate behavioral norms. Like, for example, in my childhood, it was completely normal to eat spaghetti with bread. If you go to Italy, you will typically find people eating bread with olive oil and spaghetti or something else. And conversely, in my childhood, if you chose a spoon and a fork to eat your spaghetti, people would look at you in a weird way. That wasn't exactly the Eastern European/Soviet way of eating macaroni. It's part of the culture. Any group of people, any time frame, any environment has these cultural traits. It always exists. In a relationship, there's a culture. Do you leave your toilet seat open or closed? That's part of the culture. It's a behavioral protocol. It's a small thing, but trust me, if you're not aligned on this, it can cause you a lot of misery. And of course, if that works like that in a two-people relationship, when you scale it to company magnitude, that's a different story because people evolve all the time, they change their motivations, they come in with different ideas. So there's always some kind of primordial soup of a culture as the grand total of all the behavioral patterns. So it always exists. You can influence it, you can let it be. Ideally, it has to serve the business. If you are consciously building a culture in your studio, you have to have the business goals in mind. You have to make these decisions based on what's good for my HR strategy, what's good for my execution, what's good for my management strategy. That sounds, again, for the third or fourth time, really obvious, really difficult in practice. Like one example I already brought up today earlier is profanity. Like, do you swear during the meetings or do you not? And if you've had these conversations in your studio, and many of us have had these conversations, it typically goes along the lines of, it's gonna offend some people, so we shouldn't be doing this, but we have a tradition of doing this, no. It's really rare when people ask, what would serve our business goals? Are we actually losing anyone because of profanity during the meetings? Are we actually hiring anyone because of profanity in the meetings? Is the emotional release that comes with saying fuck loud and clear for everyone to hear, is it worth the trade-off? Maybe we should ban profanity in team meetings, in large groups, but if it's, let's say, the top management, a top management retreat, a close circle, really intense conversation, people have known each other intimately for many years, maybe that should be their language. Maybe they should only use profanity, because then they get this emotional release, they can finally let it out, and that's going to be serving the business goal, because then they come back refreshed, they understand each other better, they have this common cult-like tradition. And those small things add up. So whatever element of culture you take, it has to ideally serve the business goals. But it's really difficult to implement in practice. Next point, culture always changes. Again, I really like finding patterns in different fields in a relationship with two people. Again, we are being told this story of two people meeting each other, falling in love, getting married. It all happens within 3 months, and then the next 60 years, everything is automatic, obviously. This is the fun part, and this is just smooth sailing. In practice, a lot of fun stuff happens in year 1, year 2, after year 7, and so it goes. Until everyone is kind of either adjusted or desensitized to the extent where it doesn't make any difference. But it's never a point in time where things just click, and then it's easy from there. In a company, it's even worse, because you have people coming in, you have people leaving, you have people developing their own interests, you have people growing as humans, you have people pivoting towards new fields. So it's always changing. And if you are not maintaining your culture, it's going to be mutating all the time. And that's exactly what happened to us when we started out as a small group, 5 guys. Everything was automatic, because we're all on the same wavelength. We were killing it in a new market. There was a whole bunch of open land for us to grab. This was the wild west of mobile free-to-play. So amazing. So we had this shared conviction that we should work our asses off, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's stupid to miss that. And I would come into the office and work for 16 hours. I would sleep 6 hours, go back into the office, just code, design, code, design. I should have designed more. But at the end of the day, we were laser sharp, focused on the awesome opportunities. So we were assuming that if people come in and they see this, and they see the open lens for us to capture, they will automatically understand, okay, I should abandon a lot of things. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. We should be working our asses off. That didn't happen, because the more people you add to the system, the more diluted the motivation becomes automatically, the more diluted the culture becomes, because they come with their own convictions, they come with their own perspectives. Some people came to us because we had the money. They knew we had the money, so they came for the money. Some people came to us because we were this famous employer, a trophy employer. They wanted to work for this company, put it on a resume, move somewhere else. Some people came because we had great game ideas, which is an amazing thing in the right environment, horrible thing in the wrong environment. Yeah, I've been going over this again and again because it's really important. Culture always requires maintenance. It's never set in stone. It's never just a handbook that you write and you give out to employees during the hiring process, like, hey guys, this is how we work. It's going to change over time. Culture is never good or bad. So we have this, again, coming from gaming, this kind of perspective that if we are liberal, if we give everyone creative freedom, if we trust people, this is a great culture. If we are patriarchic, hierarchical, really over-managing, over-controlling, this is bad culture. In practice, it's never good or bad. It's either weak or strong. Weak is diluted. Weak is multi-layered motivations, people doing their own thing. Strong is solid. You talk to anyone in the company, they all project the same values, they all project the same goals, the same conditions. So it's either weak or strong. It can be more rigid, more centralized. It could be more loose, decentralized. That largely depends on the nature of problems we're solving. I always bring commercial aviation, which is the reason why we have this wonderful screenshot from Microsoft Flight Simulator. Because commercial aviation is one of these examples where you have to have rigid structure, not because pilots are dumb and you can't get them to work without having 1,000 rules in the rulebook, but because the price of mistake is so damn high. People die, there's huge reputational risk, lots of damage being done, disproportional damage. And even within the aviation industry, there have been changes. Like, I think before the 70s, I think it happened in the 70s, the captain of the aircraft was a godlike figure. Like, whatever he does is correct. Everyone else is basically to give him coffee. I'm simplifying, but that was the culture, and that culture came from the marine transport, and that kind of carried over to aviation, where the guy in the left seat is godlike. Then a bunch of high-profile disasters happened that were ultimately traced to poor communication in the cockpit, like captains not using their first officers, engineers to their full advantage, kind of missing on cues from them, and that changed the culture in the cockpit completely. And now even the communication between the captain and the first officer is standardized. So the specific language, there's the concept of sterile cockpit. If it's a critical phase of flight, everyone shuts the hell up. You can't talk about your kids and football anymore. It's quiet. Communication with the ATC, also highly structured. Specific phrases in English, also written in blood after the Tenerife disaster where Spanish and Dutch guys misunderstood each other slightly and 600 people died. So in this context where the risk is tremendous, everything is really structured, cross-checked multiple times. And that's the culture that serves a specific purpose. On the other hand, if we're making games, we have these open-ended problems where how do we entertain people for the 1,000th times, but differently? Like, how do we make it fun, like this game, but not exactly like this game? So we have really abstract problems working with, and the risk level was really low. Like, yeah, we can burn some money, we can burn some investors, they'll be upset, they'll give us a hard time, but nobody dies, at least. So for this industry, typically you want to have a loose, liberal, creative kind of vibe. And this is why we typically lean towards decentralized, trust-based, fluid environments when we're making games, or movies for that matter. Not because we are great people, not because everyone in this game is so smart and advanced and forward-thinking, but basically because we're solving this specific combination of abstract tasks, low risk. A binary definition of cultures. Weak versus strong. I won't be reading this. There's way too much. But basically, there are some red flags. For example, if you're an employee, you're coming into a job interview, you want to test the waters, you want to see if this company is united or not, it's worth asking people about their motivation. You're going to be facing different guys. There's going to be an HR guy, probably. There's going to be a technical guy, probably. Might be a manager of some sort, some kind of talking head like me. You can ask them the same question about their motivation. What brings you here? What drives your interest? And if they are giving you the same, or more or less the same kind of answer, that's a good sign. If one guy is saying, I'm just an HR guy, I'm hiring people, that's why I'm here. And the other guy is saying, it's a great career path towards a higher position, and the other guy says, I'm here for the money, this company pays really well, come work for us. These are all valid answers, but they all kind of miss the point, because if anyone is really embedded in the culture, they will probably tell you something about the overarching goals of the organization, about their intrinsic motivation to be there. So it's a good question to ask. In organizations with weak cultures, you typically have this amazing, really popular boss figures, like really important guys that kind of have a finger in every pie, their phone is constantly ringing, they're always busy, they are intimidating. And especially in Eastern European business culture, these guys are typically admired, so that's your image of a successful entrepreneur. a successful business guy. He's really important. He's really busy. He's always being distracted by everyone. He's always in high demand. Typically, that's a sign of a weak culture, because culture is ultimately automation. If you automate the shit out of your processes, again, like an airline pilot, you're there for the 1% of the cases where things go south. The rest of the time, things just work. If you have to always micromanage, you are this kind of pilot who is always, struggling with the yoke, and he's all sweaty, and he's really muscular, he's really big and intimidating, but ultimately he's just doing manual labor when things could have been automated. Same in organizations. If you see these larger-than-life figures, really like important bosses or intimidating guys, maybe that's just the way they are, but sometimes it's a sign of them kind of covering for the deficiencies of the system and deficiencies of the culture by being so involved and so present everywhere else. A bunch of other things. Responsibility means punishment, responsibility means ownership. Almost the same thing, completely different flavor. And my personal favorite, I have friends who are running businesses. Some of them are running small, medium businesses, and they're really impressed by authoritarian, super busy guys, and they always ask me, how am I in business? Like, I'm useless, I'm powerless, I'm not busy, I'm not a high demand, I'm not responding to phone calls, I'm not yelling at my teammates. Well, sometimes I am, but they don't see this. Very rarely. So I would say that if all of your CEO friends are impressed by how authoritarian and important you are, that's a warning signal. If all of your CEO friends are trying to help you, call an ambulance, try to send you to a therapist or a coach, and wondering how this circus is still rolling on, that might be a good sign. Some topics I want to cover next. How do we leverage our opportunities? How do we change the inputs to achieve the desired outcomes? Founder values, number one, obviously, founders, managers, project their own values, get a lot of attention. The chicken and egg problem of hiring to match the values or matching the values to the people we already have so that they can work more comfortably. Theory of constraints, there's going to be a separate slide for this. And values versus processes. Lots of graphics on this one. I told you shit's going to get thick. Founder values, super important, obviously. Sometimes, especially in large organizations, you can have the scenarios where the management is really nice, but where's the founder? Oh, he's in Ibiza. How long has he been in Ibiza? 5, 6 years? This is fine if he's not involved in the operations anymore. That's fine. The guy has earned his pension, he can chill there. What's not fine if is the guy occasionally stepping into the operations and interfering, because everyone has to be aligned, everyone has to be on the same wavelength, there has to be a perfect match of founder values, if they're still in the company, C-level values, middle management values, their approach. How do you achieve that? I like to use a model called spiral dynamics, which is it has different flavors to it. There's the Claire Graves original, I think, and there's the more popular Ken Wilber variation. But it basically says that every individual and every society is going through cycles where you develop a way of solving your problems. You run with it, it works great. Then you reach some kind of glass ceiling where it doesn't work. You go through a crisis, and then you realize that all of your tools actually suck, and you go to the next level. If we're talking about societies, if you go back, okay, right now there's this almost universally shared understanding that waging war on your neighbor is not nice. That's not how you solve problems, generally speaking. It's not a nice way of doing business. Rewind, say, 200 years, 3 centuries back, that was a normal way of doing business. You're upset with your neighbor, he has a weaker army, you're gonna get an alliance, fuck shit up, capture the territory. That was the way of doing things. But even then, assaulting your next-door neighbor as a private individual wasn't okay. That's a crime. But if you rewind 3,000 years, then maybe it's not a big deal. He's weak, he's not protected, I'm gonna steal his shit, I'm gonna use violence to solve my problems, gain territory. So it's pretty much the same context, but at different phases, different tools work based on the society and the circumstances. And the same goes for private individuals. Like most teenagers can be quite aggressive and quite straightforward and demanding. Then eventually, as we develop as humans, we realize that, okay, maybe life is not about always asking for things. Life is not always about aggressively taking things. Maybe there's more collaboration out there that can be beneficial. And so we develop in the cycles, and eventually we become wiser and realize that nothing really matters and become really boring. But I see a similar pattern in organizations. When you are in infancy, there's this famous organizational life cycle model by the Adidas Institute, where you have infancy, the go-go phase, the adulthood, the prime, the aristocracy, and the decline. And you are kind of bouncing between the top elements until you die. So we kind of match those two. We can infer that if you're in a startup, you could be well off with really aggressive managers because you have to survive. You don't have enough runway. You have to solve your product market fit. You have to move really fast and break things. And this is where you don't want people asking too many questions. You want people who are just really motivated by money and fame and power, and you just want them running wild, hustling, and kind of breaking all the rules until the business is more or less stable. When you reach a point when you're a bigger organization, you have the social responsibility, you have big profile, there's more attention, you're getting scrutinized. You want to have more versatile, more political people running the company. And there are great examples of this. For example, Uber. Travis Kalanick was great for the ascension of Uber because Uber broke all the laws. They made lots of enemies, they upset a lot of people, but they kind of, against the odds, became super well-funded global business. So Travis was the right guy for the job, kind of not seeing any obstacles, giving the middle finger to everyone around him. Eventually, Uber became really big. Massive company, and then all the dirty stories started surfacing up about the culture, the toxic masculinity, workplace harassment, and ultimately Travis was ousted from his own company and replaced by Dara Khosrowshahi, who is a much more political character. He looks like your nice uncle. He behaves like your super nice uncle, and that's exactly the kind of situation where Travis did a great job, but Uber is a different company now, so it has to have a different CEO. And it's important to understand that the founder and CEO roles are not forever glued to each other. A founder is just a guy who basically planted the seed and oversaw the initial process. As a CEO, you're an executive. You're a hired individual. You're employed by your shareholders, and you have to work within a specific protocol which responds to the desires of the shareholders. So these are different roles. So sometimes the founder CEO has to go and make room for someone else. Sometimes founder CEOs kind of grow into their roles. Mark Zuckerberg, another great example. Like if you think of Mark in mid-noughts, in his early Facebook years, the kind of character Mark was, and you think of Mark in the Senate, answering questions in really vague, political, calculated language, different people. He had the time to go from one person, being one person, to be another person, under the pressure of his board, his management, Sheryl Sandberg, all the other guys, all the other stakeholders. So sometimes founder CEOs kind of get molded into someone else. That's my story as well, because I started as a guy who exclusively programmed, and I was basically delegating everything else. And then I became really annoyed with other people, so I distanced myself from all management, and then I was really hands-on and tried to micromanage everything, and then I got myself distanced again. So I've been going through these different phases where I was kind of trying different hats and trying to see, okay, for this phase of the company, what works best. Spoiler, nothing really worked, but ultimately I have some stories to tell. So once we established that the founder values, top management values are more or less aligned, one way or another, how do we get them synchronized and cross-checked all the time? What we do, a disclaimer, we're not doing nearly enough on this front, but what we're doing is leadership check-ins. Every week I have my top management with me for an hour, just giving updates on stuff that's been going on, and making sure we're on the same wavelength. This is purely, there's very little factual information flow, and this is mostly emotion, just making sure that we're still aligned on our goals, everyone's kind of thinking the same way, emotionally we're on the same wavelength, more or less. We also have a wider development council, which is basically a legislative power within the company. It's a wider circle, it's voluntary. If you're a manager, you can join. And they basically go through all the outstanding issues, kind of pin things on the wall and say, okay, so this is the 50 ways in which we currently suck. Realistically, we can fix 2, so let's pick 5 and try to work on this. So we have this horizontal slices where people who are supposed to be the carriers of culture routinely come into contact, kind of mingle with each other, and cross-check, spread the culture. Also, obviously, hiring is super important. One of the things I do, and believe everyone else should be doing as well, is interviewing every candidate themselves, as long as you are not in the thousands. I mean, if the company is in the thousands of people, hiring 100 people a week, maybe you have to delegate this. But in a company of our size, 150 people, I'm doing 2-3 interviews every week. That's a lot of fun, but most importantly, it kind of closes the loop, because I'm the ultimate carrier of the values. My values cannot deviate from the values of the company. The guy coming in is on the other end of the spectrum. He's just coming in with his own set of values. So we kind of cross-check at this stage, do a match. I talk through all the principles we have. I kind of try to communicate, but also kind of verify that this is resonating, that the guy is not just giving me the kind of answers I want to hear, but genuinely supporting this. At the same time, there's another feedback loop, because my HR guys are there as well. So they get to listen to my questions and my answers, and they spend an hour with me during each of these interviews. So they get to hear the story of the company once again, they get to hear the strategy of the company once again, they get to hear about the principles once again. So the recruiters get severely indoctrinated, and they're the most indoctrinated people in the company, because I spend more time talking to them than I spend talking to my wife, at least in the business context. So they spend hours every month with me listening to what's going on inside my head, and then they go out there and they recruit people based on the same principles, and they also onboard people based on the same principles. So it's like a bunch of loops automatically being generated, and that costs me like 3 hours, 4 hours of my time weekly, which is an investment, but I think it's worth it, and it's also good fun, and it also gets me a lot of side benefits. Like I get feedback from these people, I get information about the market, so for me it's a no-brainer. But it took me, I think, 9 years to realize that it's such a great investment. How are we doing, guys? Are you still following me? Some of you?
Sure.
Thank you, thank you. Nice, nice, better than me. Yeah, because this is highly academic. But trust me, all of this is being applied, and I've only listed things that we have tested and kind of iterated upon for years. Values and processes. I think it took us like 8 years to write down the values of the company, which is stupid when you think about it, because we always had some values, but we thought that this is, intuitive. Like, everyone wants to be honest with each other, right? Everyone wants to demonstrate ownership. I own my mistakes, I take responsibility for my actions, but values are actually double-edged swords, so they all come with their pros and cons. And I also talked through this during the interviews. You kind of want everyone to be honest when you come into organization. You do not necessarily want to be always honest about your own actions. You do not necessarily want other people to expect radical honesty from you, unless you have the specific social contract where everybody says, okay, radical honesty in our company means this. We all read this, we all agree on this, and then it kind of works. So there's a difference between, oh yes, I'm an honest person, I want everyone else to be honest, and actually practicing this kind of radical honesty in the working environment. Same for ownership. Obviously, I want people in my company to own their mistakes, to take full responsibility for whatever task has been given to them. I want them to complete their assignments no matter what. If something happens that's not in the rule book, if it's out of ordinary, they still get the job done. So that's the kind of attitude I expect. Am I ready to do the same? Am I ready to deal with an emergency when it's 6 o'clock in the evening on a Friday night? Where does my ownership start and where does it end? So they're all double-edged swords. There's a lot of nuance there. Designing values also has to take the business goals into account, naturally, because you cannot just say, I'm an honest person. I want everyone in my company to practice honesty. I'm an excellent expert in my craft. Excellence is going to be one of our values. It's great when your values are intrinsic and they are the source of inspiration, but ultimately you design your company to perform a specific function and achieve specific goals. We spent 2 years iterating on the values, even though we kind of knew what kind of values we embodied and we knew what kind of values we were ultimately going to write down, but just working on the definitions and choosing the 3 or 5 that really matter, that took us a lot of time. Because you think of transparency, and it's kind of awesome, but do we need transparency and trust and honesty? Which one is the highest priority? How do we package them so that when a new person comes in, we can explain it in 3 minutes, not give them a 30-page rule book, like here, the 50 values of our company, and then they remember none. Once we've nailed down the values, we have to make sure they deliver to the customer being our employee, obviously, our colleague, even our boss. Embedded in the hiring process, we always talk about values. We hire by values religiously, like the biggest mistakes we've done and the biggest risks we've taken, hiring people and making an exception. Like, we kind of feel that this guy is not really aligned, but he's really good with hard skills. We really need this guy in this place, so maybe we can compromise if we all agree on this. These are the biggest risks. Launching projects, killing projects, nothing come close with not being meticulous enough about hiring by the specific parameters. The rest is boring. You can ask me questions about this. Also, interview your candidates yourself. One thing I wanted to quickly touch upon is the theory of contrast. There's going to be a book I'm referencing in the end, but basically, once you've nailed down your values and your primary documents and you're all aligned, you need to have a process in place which kind of consistently seeks for failures. And one of the mental models for this is called the theory of constraints, and it begins by asking the question, what's getting in the way of a, let's say, €1 billion market cap for the company? Our valuation is 55. What's preventing us from being a unicorn? Or if you are already valued at $1 billion or euros, what's preventing us from going to, let's say, 50 billion? And you start kind of going through the entire process and looking for bottlenecks. And once you identify a bottleneck, you kind of try to maximize its capacity, bring it to the limit, then see what's the limiting factor, remove the limiting factors as much as you can. For example, if I'm the bottleneck in my company, if I'm not performing my duties well, maybe that's because I'm unable to delegate some of my other responsibilities and I'm not able to focus my energy on the few things that matter. So maybe it's not just about me, maybe it's about certain things we can kind of manipulate around me and then unlock my potential. Then we check if that's actually working, and then we seek for the next bottleneck again. So in our case, once we started kind of reworking our management processes and our culture, we found that we had an okay-ish top leadership. We had really good performers on the ground, but the middle management was kind of uneven. Great guys, don't get me wrong, great guys, all of them, but there was some misalignment. Like, for some of them, maybe they were not comfortable with the time frames they were assigned to work within. Like, they were comfortable planning for 6 months. We asked them to plan for 3 years because our company's strategy was 3 years, so we asked everyone to see 3 years ahead. And people don't naturally plan for the same time frame. It all depends on your level of comfort with as a manager. So you can plan for specific time frames. They typically increase over time, but they don't automatically align with whatever's been assigned to you. And when you ask a person who has this comfortable time frame range of, let's say, 6-month planning, and you ask him to think 3 years, that's horribly uncomfortable for them. And they will never know. They cannot articulate this, but they'll be feeling out of their depth and not knowing why. Also, one of the models that's really useful is the personality profiling. we use the PAEI model from the Edvice Institute, which is basically standing for Product Administrative Entrepreneurial Integrator. So when we, again, it's really imprecise, but basically you have these different traits in all your managers, where some people are more product-oriented, some people are more entrepreneurial, they want to break rules and move fast. Some people are more about, hey, let's all hug and talk and find the shared mutual understanding of the problem. So that's one angle we kind of use to look at our managers and see if they're actually up for the tasks they're being assigned. So long story short, there's always a bottleneck in any organization. There's many ways to look at this. We try to look from different angles, see if it's a personality misfit, if it's the planning horizon misfit, or if people are just out of their depth and they need to be slightly uncomfortable, but not too uncomfortable to grow and not stagnate. And this is pretty much it. As a summary, as a mandatory motivational quote, I really think of culture as an automation mechanism. It's not something that's the ultimate goal of any organization. It's not something that's going to be written on my grave. Okay, this guy didn't make a lot of money, but he built a great culture. I think of it as an automation system where you could be doing some manual labor as a manager. You could be saving yourself for the unforeseen scenarios, for the times of crisis. There is fun in both approaches. It's just a question of where you see yourself and what's the primary demand of the organization. And here is some reading, if I managed to spark your interest in any way, some of the books reading by much smarter people than myself. I specifically want to point out the last one. It's actually a blog by Joachim Akren. He's one of the Supercell guys, really, really smart. Amazing blog on leadership in gaming. He also has a book out on Amazon. It's called The Long-Term Game. I also recommend this one. He also does a podcast. I did a podcast with him. I think it's one of the best podcasts I've ever done. That's not a high standard, but that basically tells you about how much respect I have for him. So look up Elite Game Developers. He didn't ask me to promote him. He doesn't need any promotion from me. But I think it's genuinely good content from the leadership and game development angle. Thank you so much for your attention and staying with me for an hour.
Thank you so much, Vladimir, for sharing your experience in a really honest and transparent way. So
radical
we
honesty.
have quite an audience in here. I'm sure that you have questions. So if you have, just raise your hand and we will go to you with a microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Ulyana. Thank you for your lecture. It was really exciting to hear your view, to hear more about your values. And you talked a lot about your company and the values in your company. And I'm just excited. Do you remember when you realized that you came to success, that you came to the values you think are good enough, and if there was a great twist in your company, or it was just a path full of your efforts, your team's efforts, and it was not like a great twist, it was a long path?
It was a long path. Well, thank you for the question, an excellent one. There wasn't a binary switch, of course, but there's always been this kind of feeling that there's this mass of people I really enjoy working with, and people I really enjoy seeing at work and seeing in the Slack channels and the way they communicate and the way they approach problems. And then there's the other people who are supposedly great, and we hired them, and they're doing their jobs, but there's a different kind of vibe. And the balance has been shifting. So over time, we went from having a bunch of people I was really proud of working with, to having an overwhelming majority of people I'm really happy and proud to be working with. But there was a tipping point, I guess, when I realized that we no longer have to propagate the culture this hard, and the system is kind of becoming self-sustaining because we have enough carriers of these values in the company kind of begin talking to each other, and they organize themselves around the values that we have outlined. So we no longer have to be the missionaries kind of carrying the symbols and always reminding people, hey, this is right, this is wrong. And it kind of became autonomous in full appreciation of the fact that we still have to maintain it. But it's kind of like you go into the gym and your muscles are developing, and then you reach a point where you say, okay, now I'm strong, but I still have to maintain it. So that was the same kind of dynamic. You still have to go to the gym, but you kind of feel like, okay, I can perform more. I have a wider range of exercises. I feel better about myself. I can take off my shirt occasionally. So that was this kind of situation. Never enough, but it just feels nicer to be there.
Okay, thank you.
What does CAPI means?
Oh yeah, that's the thing I skipped. Thank you so much.
Because you mentioned like a few times and you didn't mention it.
Yeah. So I was really concerned about being way too academic, way too information-based. But thank you for asking. CAPI also is the Edvice Institute methodology, and it translates as consensus of authority, power, and influence. And that's their mental model for trying to estimate if a person or group have the capacity to actually implement the change. And we use it, again, as a kind of verification mechanism when we say, hey, we have this problem, who wants to solve it? I want to solve it. Do you have the authority? I do have the authority. Do you have the power to do this, like actual resources? Maybe I'm, as a CEO, I have the authority. Do I actually have the power? Not necessarily. The resources could belong to someone else. Maybe I don't have the time. Do I have the influence? In some cases, people have the authority, they have the power, but they're not influential enough, so they can do anything because they're getting sabotaged. So it's kind of a verification mechanism. Like, do we actually have all the three components? If something is missing, do we need to replace the person with someone else? Do we have to add someone? Maybe they don't have the authority. Maybe this guy is a top-tier manager. They have the authority that's been given to them. They have the financial and human resources, but they are not influential on the ground, so maybe we have to pair them with someone who is actually getting things done, and then we have the copy as a consensus of all those things.
Thank you.
Actually works in practice. Again, it sounds really academic, but it's just a mental model, right? And it's not perfect, but it's infinitely better than just saying, oh, you want to be a volunteer on this one? Yeah, go ahead. And then people are like, oh, I spent 6 months working on it. I'm a top-tier manager, but nothing came out of it because people keep doing something else. Well, maybe you didn't have some of the elements or some of the tools. And that's just one way of checking against this.
Thank you for a very nice talk. Usually these lectures contain 60% of promotion and 40% of useful stuff. Your talk actually has only 5% of promotion.
Self-promotion.
Yes, and 95% of useful knowledge. So thank you. You mentioned Itzhak Adiz's methodology, PAEI, right? And he thinks that a great leader can have only one or maximum 2 roles. So the question for you is, how many roles do you combine?
PE.
PE. It's production and entrepreneurship.
Yes, capital P, capital E, if we do the test. And I always take this test with a grain of salt because you cannot really assess a personality in 15 minutes. But there's definitely something to it as a kind of a guiding vector. Like, that's one way of looking at yourself and the other people. And if you combine it with all the other approaches, it kind of begins to make sense. And in my case, I've done the test multiple times over the years, actually different tests that kind of align with the same methodology, and I've always gotten consistent results, and that aligns with how I see myself, and that aligns with my track record. Whenever I'm building things with my own hands, I excel. Whenever I have this idea that I can run wild with, I excel. Whenever I'm forced to obtain consensus or agreement from people, whenever I need to bring a group together, have some kind of group discussion, I suck at it. And I hate it, and I hate organizing meetings, and I hate doing meeting minutes. I hate that kind of work. So that's been consistent. And I do agree that if you are aiming to eliminate the weaknesses, and I think if you're trying to develop all the components you're kind of working to minimize the weaknesses, you miss out the opportunity to maximize the strengths. And again, any investor would rather pick an entrepreneur who is really focused on execution, who doesn't care about what other people think. He doesn't care about other people integrate his ideas, but he's got one specific vector, and there he's 5% better than the rest. So he's going to win, ultimately. And I think it's the same in the organization. It's kind of like professional sports. So here I'm fully aligned with Mr. Dizes.
Awesome. Thank you. And you have a co-founder. Does it mean that he's got 2 other capitals?
Actually,
AI.
Yeah, actually, yes. I think he has one of the other 2 in the non-capital form, depending on what kind of test you look at. But I have a bunch of people from the company here as well, and they will testify that we are vastly different. Like the way, and we actually even kind of radicalized over time. Like I became more of a zero fucks giving entrepreneurial spirit, and he's the guy doing the cleanup, like making sure everyone is nice to each other and aligned. And we have our disagreements over that because the styles are vastly different, but I think that some degree of respectful conflict is healthy. So I'm coming from my angle, he's coming from his angle, and we are really complementary in that sense. But then again, it's kind of, maybe that's how we came to be organically, and maybe that's how we kind of influenced each other to not overlap that much. I don't know, honestly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, excellent question.
If nobody has more question, actually I have one. It's a bit about self-promotion, and it's a bit off the topic, but on the first couple of slides you mentioned that in 2023 you will be releasing a Web3 game. Are you going to develop blockchain games? And if yes, what is your main motivation to dive into that industry?
Are we still recording?
Did you check that box to record? We will cut it.
No, I'm just kidding. It's actually been publicly announced. We're working on a racing game with Mythical Games. And if you know the Web3 space, Mythical are quite prominent there. And it's no coincidence working with them specifically because we've been doing things on blockchain since 2018. We did 2 games on Ethereum really early, well, by the standards of the current industry. Ultimately, we decided to side with Mythical Games because their vision is less of a Panzenomics, pump and dump, rug pull kind of gamified DeFi, and more of a, we're building for the long term. We want to have a great game that benefits from the blockchain technology in meaningful ways, but it doesn't hinge on blockchain as the primary draw for the players, because there's this fundamental conflict in Web3 gaming where the ones that really take off are typically propped up by the speculators and the early investors, like people coming to earn money, people coming to buy into the assets in the game early and then sell them. And in gaming, we're ultimately in the business of selling emotions. So you want to have people coming in, getting emotions, giving you money for the gaming business to be sustainable. And there's a fundamental conflict there because you have these people coming to make money and you want people coming to spend money. And the bridge is really difficult to build. And obviously we see it with, like the most publicized example is Axie Infinity, lots and lots of revenue, lots and lots of attention and lots of people playing, and then a sharp decline and nobody knows what's gonna happen next. They're building, but it's really difficult to cross this divide. So the vision of Mythical is, let's build great games first, let's build something that's appealing as a gaming product, and as a cherry on top of this cake, let people own their assets, let them trade them on the secondary market, and this is exactly how we're approaching this as well. And the reason we are moving into this space, or have moved into this space, is because A, the technology actually makes sense. If anyone tried or actually built open games with an open economy in the free-to-play context, that's quite complicated because of the inflation-deflation issues. So it's a can full of horrible creatures that you're opening. Not every game designer is brave enough to do this. And blockchain can kind of solve it in some ways by giving you this like robust, transparent way to have a secondary market for your items. The ownership element, the scarcity element kind of makes sense in the game context as well, like verifiable scarcity. We're making a racing game, we want to have 1,000 like Burberry-themed Bugattis. People can verify that it's actually 1,000, so it's useful as a tool. So that's reason number one. We would have used it even if there was no hype around it. But reason number two, cheap Web3 capital.
Aren't you afraid of competition with your main product that earns you a lot of money?
No, not really. Not really. We think that in the beginning, there's a vastly different audiences. It's not like we have our existing Nation players jump into a new product which has NFTs in it. And by the time we get to a point where it's the same audience, and for that we have to have the much requested and much needed mainstream adoption of wallets and all the the right mindset in the audience. Then that means we have kind of crossed the divide, and Web3 is dominant, and we are there. So I'm concerned about not getting there. That's the main fear. But this, not so much.
Okay, thank you for your honest answers. Yeah, let's give a round of applause to Vladimir.
Thank you.